Akitavach, everybody. So I'll tell you, Maisi, it's well known that in the early 1900s, late early 1900s, when a lot of immigrants from Europe came to America, it came with a lot of challenges for them. Obviously, most of them were coming from, those that were coming from Eastern Europe and so on, were coming from very religious homes. And it was a struggle. Making Parnasa was a struggle. Keeping Shabbos was a struggle. It's well documented and well known the type of nisyanis that they had. So it was a Maisa of a Yid at that time, early 1900s. His name was Rameir Atzvan. This Rameir Atzvan was a Chassidish Yid, and he came from Europe, and he came to America, and he was struggling, and he, like everyone else, to make a Parnasa and to raise a family and so on. But his particular field of choice to make a Parnasa and to help other Yidden was to be Malamed, was to go into Chinuch, and to try to teach in day schools in whatever capacity is possible, to try to help out, or to be hired as a tutor for parents that wanted their kids to have some Jewish education after a day of public school. So that's what he did. Now this Yid, this Rameir, found himself, the turn of the 20th century, he found himself in Detroit. So he's hired, Baruch Hashem. There's a group of kids in the neighborhood, they're all Jewish, and they're all going to public school. But after the day's over, so the parents got together to hire this Rameir as a personal Malamed for their kids, that they should have some Jewish education. Again, the parents were not the most religious in the world, so they were not dreaming of the kids learning Gemara and so on. But a Jewish education was important to them, and a Jewish identity was important. So they hired this Rameir to teach their kids. So the story goes that this Rameir gets together with the kids for the first day, and he begins the lesson of that day by teaching them what a Jew does in the morning, just to go through the Seder HaYom, the process of the day. So he tells them the first thing a Jew does: he wakes up in the morning, he says Maidani, and you wash Negelwasser, and he goes on like this, and then he begins to talk about how to get that a Jew gets dressed. And he talks about tzitzis and so on. And then he mentions to them about the halacha that we find in Shulchan Aruch about how to put on your shoes. Right? That everyone knows that's halacha in Shulchan Aruch. You put on the right shoe first, then the left, then you tie the left, and then you tie the right. That's the procedure of tying shoes. So that was the day's lesson. Fine, very nice. Kids come home, and one of the fathers, who was sort of the head of the group over there, financially and otherwise, so he asks his son, Yankel, what did you learn today with the new teacher? So, the kid, Rameir's mazel, instead of the kids saying, we learned about Maidani, we learned about Negelwasser, things like that, he said, we learned how to tie our shoes. Learned how to tie your shoes, what are you talking about? So the kid says, yeah, the Rebbe told us that we get dressed, you should put your right shoe on first, then tie the left, and this whole procedure. And the father got fuming mad. He's like, this is what I'm paying for. This is what I'm paying for this Malamed to teach my kids how to put on their shoes. I wanted to teach my kid about what it means to be a Jew and the basic ideas of Judaism. Nothing too complicated, nothing too fancy, and certainly nothing so insignificant as tying your shoes. It's ridiculous. So after hearing this, and that was the first lesson that this Rebbe had, so he got together with all the other parents and they decided to hire someone else. Okay, and that's it. Fine. Years pass. Years pass. This Rameir, again, finds other jobs, and life becomes more stabilized and secure, and it's already, again, like I said, 20, 25 years later. And this Rameir is living in Detroit. He gets a knock on the door. Again, like 20, 25 years later, this very, older but well-to-do businessman knocks on the door. He says, are you Rameir so-and-so? And he tries to make sure it's the right person. He says, yeah, here. And this person takes out an envelope from his pocket with a lot of money and gives it to him. And he says, what is this for? He says, I owe you an unbelievable amount of apologies, and I owe you the parnasa that I probably held back from you. So I'm paying you back. He says, who are you? What's going on? So he reminds him that, he says, do you remember back when you first came and there was a group of kids that you taught and you were basically fired after the first lesson? And so he's like, I taka do remember. He says, I'll tell you the story. So that was my son. My son came home, and I asked him, what did you learn? And he said he learned about how to tie his shoes, and I got all upset, and then I feel bad about it. But I had you fired. So I feel terrible about that, and that's why I want to repay the debt right now. So the Rameir responds to him. He says, like, but why now? Like, what happened? What's the story? He says, I'll tell you what. He says, my son, going through the American world, American culture, growing up in America, he was definitely much less connected to Judaism than I expected him to be, than I wanted him to be. I thought that just going through the public school system and being part of American society, he'll still feel Jewish. But I was terribly wrong. And just recently, he started going out with a non-Jew, and so much so that they got engaged, and there was a wedding date that was set. And just yesterday was the day of the wedding. Now, I was fighting with him and back and forth. My wife and I, we were threatening not to go. It became a whole big issue with the family, but my son was stubborn about it. He likes this girl. They're getting married and finished. Comes the day of the wedding. And right before, just a few hours before the wedding is supposed to take place, my son shows up by my front door and says, Dad, I broke off the wedding, finished, it's done. I only want to marry a Jewish girl. So the father says, he's saying to the Malama, he says, I asked my son, like, what happened? He said, I'll tell you what happened. And he said, I was getting dressed, mamish, getting dressed to go to the wedding. And I put on my shirt and everything like that, put on my tuxedo, and then I began to tie my shoes. And when I put my shoes on, an old memory just flooded into my head. And that was the memory of that one class that I had from that Malamed when I was a little kid, who told us how to tie our shoes according to halacha. You were the right on, the left, and so on and so forth. And when that memory came to my mind and I began to put my shoes on like that, at that moment it sparked something like I can't disconnect myself from my people. And that's why I canceled the wedding, and I could only date and marry a Jewish girl from now on. And this is what the father is saying this story back over to the Malamed. And he says, that's why I have to pay my debt for firing you then and paying you all the money that I would have paid you if you continue teaching my son. I owe everything to you. And so the Malamed Rameir takes the envelope and he says, listen, after hearing from one lesson what I was able to accomplish, I want this to be the reward that I receive from that. I want it to be straight from the Rabbanu Shalom. The very fact that your son is married someone Jewish, that's enough reward for me. So you can have your envelope back, and that's it. No, again, you never know. One kind word, one good idea, one word of Torah, just one little drop. You never know what type of effect it could have. Hashem should bless us. We should be able to have a lichte gevach, a mazal de gevach, a simcha de gevach. Wie es kol tzadikim, Harav Yimenu. Amen.